Hey everyone, it's me, Arthur Kade, welcoming the hilarious Scott Aukerman to Behind the Velvet Rope. Make sure to check out his new show on NBC Seeso, Bajillion Dollar Properties. It's hilarious. Check it out. Hey everyone, it's me, Arthur Kade. So Scott Aukerman, just telling you, saw the first episode of Bajillion Dollar Properties. I love spoof shows, and as a Bravo fan, I love seeing $1 Million Listing pretty much taken over with your comedy mind. So how does this whole idea come about?
Well, my wife and I were in the middle of buying a house, and we had seen probably 200 houses over a period of like 5 months, and we were being driven insane, clinically insane. And we just thought it would be a good idea for a show. I mean, we had seen so many odd people trying to sell houses to us, and we were, it's a high stakes situation buying a place. So we thought it would be a great idea for a show. And we love these shows, $1 Million Listing and Property Brothers. And
They're everyone's guilty pleasure.
yeah, everyone likes watching people, wrestle with should they spend 1.2 million, 1.3 million, so we love those types of shows. And so when my wife was trying to think of something to do for a show, we just automatically went to that.
I love also that it's on NBC's Seeso platform. Obviously, we're seeing this incredible migration right now towards digital platforms. Talk to me about being able to put it on digital and going away from traditional TV.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we pitched it to a lot of different places, and we got offers from a few different places. And we decided to go with Seeso, number one, because the people there are so great. They really love comedy. I mean, it's a comedy platform. But it was a decision that we had to wrestle with of like, do we want to be the first program on something that could be really great? Like, do you want to be Transparent on Amazon? Or do you want to be Mad Men on AMC? Like, do you want to be the first thing on a place that no one knows anything about? And they were just offering such a great deal of they wanted to make the show. They wanted to make several seasons of the show. They didn't want to pilot it. They didn't want to, the other places were like, well, we'll see a script or we'll make a 10-minute pilot or something. Seeso just wanted to make it outright. And so it's just been a great opportunity. I mean, I think people will really appreciate what Seeso has on the air, especially comedy fans. It's made just for comedy fans. And they're doing great stuff. So hopefully it'll catch on.
All right, so you end up casting this thing. It feels like I'm watching this, and I'm not a comedy expert, but there's got to be a ton of improv involved with this.
Yes.
And it's so over the top, which I love. It reminds me of Burning Love, what E used to do. So how do you end up casting this, and how over the top are you going to go with this?
Well, it gets even more and more over the top. I mean,
wait.
the first episode is like slightly exaggerated, and it goes so far eventually. I mean, we're doing such interesting stuff, I think, down the line. And not even stuff based on real estate anymore. I mean, we're just using it as a group of people who are forced to be around each other. And they get so sad and depressing. But, the casting was interesting because obviously we have a lot of great relationships, from Comedy Bang Bang and being, Mr. Show and being a comedian over the years, that we were able to call in a lot of favors and get people like Adam Scott and, Weird Al Yankovic and Gillian Jacobs and all these great people to come in and play insane people who are buying or selling houses. But then we worked with these incredible improvisers as the actual brokers, and we had a lot of auditions. And my one criteria was I just wanted to find the best improvisers that we could because so much of the show is on their backs. And we were really lucky that Dan Adu, who plays Amir, he was one of the first auditions that we had.
Hilarious.
He is so good. And
hilarious.
he gave one of the best auditions I've ever seen. And to me, I said, that's the standard that the whole cast has to be on. Because you don't want to have like one person being amazing and then everyone else not as good, So when we saw Dan do that audition, we said, we need 7 of these people. And we found it. It's amazing. I mean, the cast does so much of it, and it is an improvised show where basically the writers, they'll write for every scene, they'll write a paragraph and say it could probably go like this, and they'll give some sample dialogue. But the improvisers take it in such interesting directions, and it wouldn't be the show without those guys. They're really amazing.
You'd mentioned Comedy Bang Bang, and obviously it's incredible to see a podcast become a TV show. And I feel like you were one of kind of the pioneers of the whole podcast platform on many levels, at least getting it to a much larger population and format. Talk to me about the podcasting platform has become everywhere right now. It's omnipresent.
Yeah, if you're a comedian, you kind of have to have one, or at least you want to have one. It's such a great mobilization of your audience. I mean, when I first started doing comedy, you would do shows for 100 people at a time, and you would find like kind of a good LA audience who would follow you around and want to see your stuff. But really, unless you had a TV show, no one knew you outside of LA, and getting a TV show is so hard. So to then be able to do a podcast, and when I first started, it's my 7th anniversary in a month. When I first started, it was like I would look at the numbers and go, wow, 2,000 people are listening to the show. And that's more than 100, which is what I was doing a show for before. And now, it's up to the millions. And it's like, but it's such a great way to just find all of your fans around the world and have them congregate in one place. It's such an incredible opportunity, especially for comedians, which is why everyone wants to have them.
Has it blown you away to see it go from 100 to 2,000 to what it's become, and essentially people going nuts? We were talking about one of the staff here, and she's like, Scott Aukerman's coming in. She was like flipping out. Has it blown you? It was the girl sitting out there. She was like flipping out over you.
Oh, great.
Has it blown you away to see the fan base you built?
Yeah, it's so. I mean, the kind of compliment that I love, that I get a lot is, more than, I find your comedy to be artful or whatever, is I get a lot of people saying, you got me through the day, or you get me through my drive to work, or you cheered me up during a difficult time. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I think art is really sort of for. So it really is the very definition of comic relief, to like relieve people's stress. You know what I mean? So it blows me away all the time when people will write to me and say things like that. And, I'm just goofing around trying to have a fun time and, tell stupid jokes. So
I think that's one of the appealing things about Comedy Bang Bang. It's not this formal talk show. It's literally like guys sitting around, friends sitting around, and almost like drinking beers and just having fun.
Yeah, I mean, what I really wanted to do, and I was talking about this earlier with someone, is so much of my career when I worked on Mr. Show and doing like Between Two Ferns is about sort of like hard jokes and sometimes mean jokes and making statements on Mr. Show. We were always trying to like make a statement about what we were trying to say. And when I was doing Comedy Bang Bang, I just really was at a place in my life where I wanted to be silly. And I just like wanted to do something goofy finally. And that's what I've really gotten to do with, especially with the TV show, is like, we're not trying to say anything. Bob Odenkirk was on it recently playing God.
Just interviewed him last week.
You
I was
did?
telling
Great.
you for Better Call Saul.
Right, yeah.
In LA.
And he was just looking around, and he was doing this. He was playing God in this stupid episode where Kevin Pollak was playing the devil, and the devil was trying to get me to sell my soul to him. And finally, at the end, God and Satan are arguing, and I make one wish to Satan, which is that I want them to become best friends again. And they become best friends, and they combine hell and heaven into one place called Helven. And Bob was like in the middle of acting in this scene, and it's so stupid. And he just goes, you have like a comedy writer's dream show where you get to do the stupidest things and you do anything you want. And he was, because IFC has been great about not giving me a lot of notes and not reining me in or anything. And I get to kind of just deliver the show and that I want to do. And it's such a great opportunity.
Were you nervous initially moving it to television? Were you worried that, hey, what works here as a podcast may essentially be shut down? The true great elements could be shut down moving it to TV.
I knew I wanted to do something different with it. I believe I'd seen a couple of podcasts do like a special or something on TV, and all they were doing was the podcast with cameras pointed at it. And I knew I wanted to do something different. So, still to this day, I think fans of the podcast, there's a certain number of people who don't like the TV show at all because it doesn't have that thing they like about the podcast. But to me, it's like doing an adaptation of a book into a film. What works in a film wouldn't work in a book and vice versa. So I knew that if I were doing a TV show, I wanted it to be something that wasn't as ephemeral as a podcast, if you know what I mean. Like, you can listen to a podcast and we get together and we do it for an hour and it's whatever we think of. And the standard is a little lower of like what has to be entertaining, I think, on a podcast. But to do a TV show, I really wanted to make it something that was going to last and not just a filmed conversation. And so I work really, really hard on the TV show, and it's different, it's a different thing. So I wasn't necessarily worried about how to translate it because I knew what to do in my head. It really was the TV show I always wanted to make my entire life. But I guess I should have been more worried about people following me over to it because there are still people who just do not like the TV show.
That blows my mind. You would think that it would actually be an even larger fan base liking the TV versus even the podcast.
It's, you know what, it's about equal of people like the TV show and go, oh, there's a podcast, and the people who like the podcast and go, I've never seen the TV show. You know, it's there's not as much crossover as you would think. Of course, I love the people who like them both. Those are my favorite people. Like, because they, you know,
Those are your friends.
Yes, but comedy is so subjective that you can't fault anyone. And I've always said, like, if you're doing a comedy show, you have to be so specific to what your voice is. Otherwise, you're not going to please anyone. And so Comedy Bang Bang, the TV show, is very specific of what I find funny. And if people don't find it funny, I do not fault them in the least. I get it. You know, it's what I find funny. And people always kind of talk about taste in comedy, and they go, "Oh, this was brutal," or, you know, they use words like brutal or you know, devastating, or just, you know, like about comedy, which comedy inherently is supposed to be silly. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to make you laugh, you know. And if something doesn't make you laugh, it's probably just because you have a different brain than the other people.
I'm always fascinated. Obviously, you get to interview and play around with people for a living, and I get to do the same thing. And everybody always comes up to me and they're like, who are your favorite guests, your worst guests? I never ask people who their worst guests are because I would never speak negatively about other town. But I want to know who some of your favorites are and who some of your dream guests are.
Well, you know, one of my dream guests that I got to achieve was in the second season of the TV show. I got to have Paul Reubens as Pee Wee Herman on the show, which was just a dream because I
saw your tweet. Now it all makes sense because you were like, I'm taking the rest of the day off to watch the new
his
Pee Wee
new movie.
movie.
Yeah. Well, the co-writer of that movie, Paul Rust, was one of my writers on the television show. Now he has his own television show called Love on Netflix.
Which Gillian Jacobs
Right.
mentioned.
Yeah. So he co-wrote that movie with Paul Reubens, and so I had sort of an in. And I had interviewed Paul for the podcast a few years prior and had a good experience with that. I'm just a huge Pee Wee Herman fan, and the television show is sort of a cross between early Letterman and Pee Wee's Playhouse. So to have him on the show, and he was doing all new bits that Paul and he had written together, that he had never done anywhere else. And it was such a thrill for me. And what's interesting is I did watch the movie that day, the new Pee-wee's Big Holiday. And there's one bit in it that is very similar to what he did on my show that I could see like, oh, wow, in the movie he did something that he did on my show a little bit, which was like so cool to like my show debuted that bit in a way. You know, it's just so interesting.
How different is he? I've never interviewed Paul Reubens. How different is he from the Pee Wee character?
He's pretty different. I mean, he's like a pretty just normal, like kind of reserved guy. I will say when we were filming, it was so funny to me that, you know, I do a lot of chit chat on the couch because the show takes a long time to film. You know, usually a person is there 6 hours. So, you know, so I talk to the person a lot, you know, and we're going all the time, but there are little tiny breaks in between scenes. So I was just talking to Paul about things, and he said, have you been to the Walgreens on Hollywood and Vine, which had just opened? And I said, no. Why? What is it like? He was like, it's so interesting. They have sushi, and it's very large. They have a lot. He goes, you know what? I'm just going to make an announcement to the crew. And he like stood up and said, excuse me, everyone. He said, if you get a chance, please go to the Walgreens on Hollywood and Vine. And he like started listing everything that was there. And I was just like, and he was doing it kind of as a bit, I think, you know, because it's a funny thing to make an announcement for. But that was just one of those moments that I was like really laughing about, you know, just like he's just a funny dude off camera too.
Anyone else who's blown your mind or that you want?
You know, I would really love to do something with Letterman.
He's so inaccessible. He's so tough.
I think I still have hope that there's maybe one thing that I might do with him. So I'm hoping that'll happen. But that would be my dream. You know, Chris Elliott is a guy that, you know, because he was on the early Lettermans, that I would love to have on the show. But I think he lives in the middle of the country somewhere. So it's very hard for us to, we can only afford to fly one person out per season. And we've already used it on this season. So... you know, there are definitely my idols, comedy idols that I want to work with, and I've been very lucky to have so many of them on the Comedy Bang Bang TV show. Michael McKean from Spinal Tap and Better Call Saul was just on it.
Nicest guy.
So nice. Spent like
Nicest
8
guy.
hours there playing Zeus in like a fake wig and robes. Just like because he liked the script. That's what I always like is when someone who is kind of a major comedy name agrees to be on the show. You never know why they agreed to be on the show. Are they just free that day? Who knows? But when they come and they go, I loved the script so much. Jason Alexander did that. He is in one episode playing, it's sort of our homage to Clue, the movie Clue. He's playing like an inspector there's a murder on the set and he's trying to figure out who done it. And when he just goes, Chris Maloney was another guy he's in an episode sort of where he gets shrunk down and injected into my bloodstream to help me fight off a common cold. They both said, when I read the script, Chris Maloney in particular was like, when I read the script, it was the stupidest thing I'd ever read. I knew I had to do it. That's very gratifying to me because you're working with someone who's like, has given you so much joy, and then they're sort of validating what you do and saying, hey, I really like what you do. It's the best feeling.
Do you enjoy the producing part more? Because obviously with Bajillion, you and your wife produce it. Do you like being behind the camera more or being in front?
It's interesting because being on camera is very tough. Especially for Comedy Bang Bang, because it's a long shoot day. It's 14 hours usually. And I'm on camera in every scene practically. Weird Al Yankovic is my new band leader on the new season. So,
awesome.
I'm thankfully giving him more sketches to do, because he really wants to do a ton of sketches. So it gives me a little bit of a break, but for the most part, I'm there the entire time. And I'm on camera and I'm not able to really pay attention to some of the stuff that I would be normally paying attention to as a producer. Luckily, we have a great team of people who are there to support me, but it's very, very tough to do. That said, there kind of is nothing like having your own TV show and having people watching you personally do what you're doing. It's great for something like Bajillion Dollar Properties. It's so artistically pleasing. I love the episodes and I love the cast and I love doing it. But there kind of is nothing like just people watching you doing it, and knowing that, oh, you're responsible for it. Unless you become like a celebrity kind of producer like Judd Apatow is, where your name is above the title, on stuff that you produce. Most people don't connect the dots of like, oh, you produced this. Oh, they don't even know what that means. For a lot of times, on Bajillion, like I'm there on the set the entire time. I'm giving notes. I'm there in the editing room, So when you're on camera, people really relate to you as the person who's sort of the author of that show.
Where do you see comedy moving? Podcasts, blogs, we have so much going on. Netflix, streaming. Where do you see comedy moving next 5-10 years?
I mean, there's so many places to get it now, which is awesome. When I first started, I personally would just be fascinated with anyone if they did like a 2-minute spot on a show that I knew personally, and you would gather around the TV and it would be like, oh my God, Bob Odenkirk is on, Premium Blend, and I don't think he ever did Premium Blend, but you know what I mean? Like if it was someone you knew personally,
Such a big deal.
It was a big, big deal, and you would sit there and watch it and kind of judge their 3-minute set. And now everyone in comedy, there's so much opportunity. Everyone has a Netflix special. Everyone has a podcast. You can keep up with what people are doing so well. And because of the internet and the distribution, niche markets now suddenly can make money. So it's a great time when something like Seeso can come around and give a lot of money to our show. I mean, the budget for Bajillion Dollar Properties is bigger than my show.
From a major network.
I wouldn't call IFC
from
major
a cable network.
I barely would call it a network. But it's a big budget, and it's because they can attract these kind of niche audiences who, when they love something, they really love it and they want to support it. And that's, I think, what I mean when you make comedy. You have to be very specific, because you will, if you're doing something kind of general and like trying to please everybody, you'll be no one's favorite show. But if you're doing something very, very specific, you'll be a lot of people's least favorite show. And more importantly, you'll be people's most favorite show. And that's what Comedy Bang Bang is people's favorite show, because it's so specific. They're willing to follow it anywhere. And we're doing a sold out tour coming up. And that's where I think comedy is going, is if you're specific enough, you can find that audience and find a platform which is willing to pay you to do what you're going to do. And it's a really exciting time.
My final question, you'd mentioned Mr. Show, and I remember Mr. Show, and it was such a classic, incredible production. The funny thing is, I'm talking to Bob Odenkirk last week, and I go, obviously now everybody knows you as Saul Goodman, Jimmy McGill. And he goes, no, people really know me more for Mr. Show. How
Really?
proud. He mentioned something along the lines of people know me for my sketch comedy, especially Mr. Show. But
I don't think that's true.
you wouldn't. But he was so proud of it.
Oh, yeah, he should be.
Does it? When you guys look back, do you realize this was really cool what we did with that?
Well, I think I don't have to look back and realize that. I mean, when I got on the show, it was literally my favorite television show. And I really wanted to work on it. So I knew, and I was 27 at the time, I knew how important it was. And I was like, while I was making it, I was saying, I'm part of comedy history now. Like I started wanting to do comedy because I was watching Python, and I'm on what I consider to be the modern equivalent of Python. I couldn't believe it. So for me, what's been interesting is sort of, I felt like I had achieved that at 27, and I was like, it's all
There's nowhere to go but down.
Well, that's sort of what it is. And what's been interesting is figuring out, like, you look at the guys in Python and go, wow, they can do whatever they want for the rest of their lives. And that's probably true of them. It wasn't true for us in Mr. Show. Like, I had to keep kind of reinventing my career every 4 years or so to be like, okay, well, now I'm the guy who does this, or now I'm the guy who does that. I mean, I'm probably best known right now for Between Two Ferns, which is, something I've been doing for 7 years, I think, at this point. But I
love that, by the way.
That was like a new thing that I had to do because, just being on Mr. Show doesn't pay the bills. Strangely enough, doing 1 year on a critically acclaimed sketch comedy, the money was only rolling in for probably 2 years after that, where people would like give me deals because of that, and then I had to do something new. So, it's great that Bob is finally getting kind of recognized for that. I remember he was saying to me that after Breaking Bad came out, people would just like be yelling at him like "Sal," like that, and he was being recognized way more than he ever was before for Mr. Show. So I think because he went back and did the With Bob and David stuff, now maybe people are kind of putting two and two together of like, oh, Mr. Show and comedy and Breaking Bad and Bob Odenkirk, I get it. So it's good that he's finally being recognized for that.
Yeah, it's incredible to see success. And speaking of success, congratulations on all of yours.
Thank
TV
you so
shows, producing things are really good. So congrats.
Thank you.
And I think you have a really great little hit with Bajillion Dollar Properties. Really enjoyed it. So congrats.